Well, let's go live now to the Agriculture Minister and Emergency Services Minister, Murray Watt, who joins me live from Brisbane. Murray Watt, thanks for your time. Plenty to get through.
G'day, Andrew. Good to be with you.
Let me start with the front page of the Sunday Telegraph in Sydney today. It's hard to get past this, I'm afraid. Albo, a beta male PM. They're quoting focus group research from the Redbridge Group, and a gentleman from your home state has called the Prime Minister a beta male. There are others calling him weak. Can I have a reaction from this research, to this research, should I say, from you this morning?
Well, I'm not very concerned about that, Andrew. I mean, it is, as you say, a focus group, and all sorts of people say all sorts of things in focus groups. I reckon if I walk down the main street of Brisbane this morning, there'll be a few people giving me a bit of free character assessment as well. But what I think it highlights is the importance of the cost of living issues that so many Australians face. Obviously, when people are doing it tough, as they are right now, they look for the government to take tough action to address those cost of living issues, and that's exactly what we're doing. As you'd be aware, there are multiple things that we've done over the last 12 months to assist Australians with cost of living pressures, almost all of which have been opposed by Peter Dutton and the Coalition.
All right, I'll get to that.
I'm not too concerned about those sort of comments.
I'll get to the cost of living in a second, but it's pretty. Perhaps this shows Peter Dutton's getting some momentum, if you like, out of what he's trying to do. He's trying to paint the Prime Minister as weak, whether it be on the Chinese sonar incident, whether it be on the immigration detainees. Are you concerned at the PM being painted as weak?
No, I'm not, Andrew. I mean, and in fact, I noticed that there was another comment in that focus group that was reported that said that people, notwithstanding what they might have had to say about Albo, still very much preferred him to Peter Dutton. So, but I don't think that there's anything in there to be concerned about. I mean, what is tough is actually injecting budget discipline to record the first budget surplus that our country has recorded in 15 years. That has taken tough, disciplined decisions by the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and others around the Cabinet table. What's tough is actually making the hard decisions about what cost of living relief we can provide to Australians without putting too much upward pressure on inflation, and that's exactly what we've done. So I'm not concerned about those sort of remarks, and I think the record shows that both Albo and the entire Cabinet have taken the tough decisions that the country's needed to help people with cost of living pressures while not increasing inflationary pressure at the same time.
Well, let's talk about this National Cabinet on Wednesday. What sort of new NDIS regime could we be seeing? Will we see autism and ADHD type disorders come off the NDIS eligibility?
Yeah, well, obviously these are matters that are going to need to be negotiated further over the course of this week and at National Cabinet. But clearly there is an issue with the amount of increased spending around the NDIS. It is being increased at an incredibly high rate, and it's something that for budget discipline we do need to manage sensibly. One of the issues we have is that over time we have seen all of the costs for providing services to people with disability move increasingly towards the NDIS and away from things like schools and transport and other things which the states have traditionally funded. So there's got to be a discussion with the states about how we can continue to provide sustainable funding for the NDIS. The NDIS is obviously a Labor creation. We're very proud of it and we want to support it. And the way we need to do that is to make sure that it is sustainable in the long term. So what we need to do is make sure that the resources are targeted at those who most need support. There are thousands of Australians who depend upon the NDIS for a decent quality of life, and we are absolutely committed to maintaining that. At the same time, we do need to recognise that the cost of the NDIS is increasing substantially higher than it was ever expected to, and we do need to manage that responsibly.
Well, the states look like they're after a fight here. Will they cave? Are you prepared to give them more money for them to cave? And what does that potentially mean for the federal budget?
Well, again, all of these sort of things are going to be discussed over the course of this week, Andrew, and there are other matters, obviously, that will be discussed at National Cabinet as well that have very high price tags associated with them. What we're trying to do as a federal government is make sure that we can get the federal budget under control. Again, it's why we recorded that surplus. It's why we are being really disciplined about every area of Commonwealth spending, including the NDIS. And what we need to do is ensure that people with a disability are properly supported in our community, but that's done in a sustainable way. And that's what those discussions over the course of this week will involve.
The government seems pretty keen to keep up this policy of no further cost of living relief at the end of this year, past what you would probably refer to cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines, free TAFE. But is that going to cause you a fair bit of political pain over summer?
I think that most Australians can see that the government is doing everything we possibly can to provide those who need cost of living relief most with the support that they need without putting too much pressure on inflation. The worst thing we could do at the moment is get a big government fire hose out and spray lots of money around and drive inflation back up. That would almost certainly lead to further interest rate rises, which we don't want to see happen if we can avoid it. So it's about getting that balance right. As I say, and you've listed some of those cost of living relief measures that we've taken, pretty much all of which were opposed by the opposition and Peter Dutton. So we are providing that relief where we can, but we do need to do it in a responsible manner that doesn't put more pressure on inflation.
I want to ask now about this preventive detention legislation we're expected to see this week. How many of the 142 detainees we've seen get free do you think are likely to be captured by this?
Well, obviously that matter in the end would be up to the court, because one of the important things that we're doing with this law is fixing Peter Dutton's mess. He left an unconstitutional, unlawful scheme in place, which is what has led to the release of these 140-odd people. What we need to do is follow the High Court's reasoning, which said that these matters need to be made by courts rather than ministers. But what we want to do in doing so is put in place a robust preventative detention and community safety order scheme, similar to what we already have in place for people convicted of serious terrorist offences, because what we want to make sure is that the worst of these people who've been released into the community are detained, but that's done so in a constitutional way that stands up in court. And that's the big difference from what the system that Peter Dutton inherited and left to us involved.
Can you tell me roughly how many people have been the subject of those preventive detention community safety orders you just mentioned in relation to terror suspects?
I don't have the exact number, but I know it's a fairly small number because it is focused on the people who are the greatest risk to the community. And what we want to do with this new regime is do the same thing. And I think that this will be a real test for Peter Dutton and the opposition this week. We've seen a lot of politics from them over the last few weeks without a lot of constructive assistance to ensure that we can pass laws that protect the Australian community. So Peter Dutton and his team this week have got a choice. Are they about politics or are they about protection of the community?
All right,
I know which side I'm on. It's about protecting the community.
Sure, but could it be a small number of immigration detainees that are subject to this in the end?
Well, again, that decision ultimately will need to be made by the court. The whole problem we have here is that the system that Peter Dutton employed was one which left that decision with ministers to decide to detain people, and the High Court has ruled that that is unlawful and unconstitutional.
Right, the High Court,
so it would be irresponsible for...
Sorry, the High Court said that it would apply if it was introduced to those who are, a quote, an unacceptable risk of reoffending, unquote. That seems a pretty high bar, doesn't it?
Well, and that's similar to how the preventative detention regime that applies to terrorist offenders operates at the moment. It's that those who provide an unacceptable risk to the community are those who need to be detained. It would be highly irresponsible of any minister to fly in the face of High Court reasoning to say here now or anywhere how many people this will apply to, when this is the exact issue that has caused this problem. By having ministers make these decisions, which is the system that Peter Dutton handed on to us, that is exactly what has led us to this position. So we want to respect the High Court's ruling while at the same time make sure that we have a strong, tough regime that protects the Australian community. And we hope that this week the opposition will support us rather than playing politics and voting against legislation, which is what we've seen them do over the last couple of weeks.